Hello, everyone. Hi, Andrea. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Fantastic. So thank you very much for joining our webinar. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for joining us, Andrea. Thank you to our audience. This is Efe Pazarçevren. I am a CEO and co-founder of VireUp. As some of you might know, VireUp is an AI-powered job interview platform that helps recruiters to identify the best candidates efficiently and in an unbiased fashion. In this session, we will cover the challenges of high-volume recruitment and how to address them. We have a very valuable guest speaker with us, Andrea. This is a rescheduled session. It was supposed to happen a couple of weeks back, but due to some technical difficulties, we had to move it to today. I am very sorry about that, but now the problems are solved and you are with us, and I'm glad we could make it. So before we proceed, I would like to mention a quick detail. We will not be able to accept and respond to questions and comments during the session because this is our first webinar and I don't want to have any hiccups there. But please do not hesitate to send your questions or comments after the conversation. We will be more than happy to respond separately. So, of course, before we start, Andrea, welcome. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself for our guests?
Yeah, thanks, Evan. So, hi everyone. I'm Andrea Marston. I'm the Senior Director of Global TA at VMware, which is a software company. We're about 37,000 people globally. And my background, I've been in TA now for over 20 years. I've worked in recruitment agencies initially and exec search. And then I've been working for a number of different tech companies for the last 12 years now. So companies like Workday, Huddle, VMware more recently, and also Right Now, which was acquired by Oracle. So real mixture of types of companies, from startups all the way to larger global tech companies.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Andrea, and thanks for joining us again. Today we will focus, as you can already figure out from Andrea's background and her experience, we will focus slightly on the technology industry in this high-volume recruitment context. But as you can imagine, there will be a lot of implications for other industries as well. When we talk about high-volume recruitment, before we dive into that, maybe we can understand the context a bit better. So maybe we can start with the basics. How do we define high-volume recruitment? And for which type of roles do we usually see that? So would like to start with that, Andrea, maybe?
Yeah, sure. So when we talk about high volume, look, my experience really has been in tech. I've not worked in hospitality companies or retail where there really is a lot of high volume. And you do see that's where we tend to go when we think of high volume. So it's the kind of companies where you're going to hire a lot of either limited skills people at high volume. So it might be, for example, retail staff that have only got little experience and you're trying to do it in bulk and volume. Amazon is a great example of having to hire lots of people to come in at this time of year to cope with the Christmas rush. So that's the high volume we tend to talk about as an industry. But when it comes to tech, we don't have that many roles that we will generally be looking to hire at high volume. So we have a slightly different description of it. So we would consider high volume to be things like, for example, tech support engineers, or potentially inside salespeople. Those sorts of roles where you're hiring repeatedly, you're hiring the same sort of profile on a regular basis, where basically you almost need an always on hiring model. So it's that that if you found the people, you'd have a job for them as soon as you're actually ready to hire. You wouldn't need to wait for the role to come up. And that's really how we differentiate it.
Mm-hmm. Understood. I think there are some significant characteristics of technology space there. I think based on my experience on some other industries, seasonality, you mentioned, for example, Christmas time, etc. In some other industries, there's also, especially for early talent recruitment, there is an element of attracting and recruiting people just finishing their universities or in the last years of their universities, interns. So there's a little bit of that as well, I can imagine. I think you mentioned some of the roles that sound relatively more junior or blue collar in nature. Maybe there is some sort of high volume type of implications, even for your industry, Andrea, for maybe back office or customer service type of roles, this type of roles, I can imagine. And it sounds like from seniority point of view, it is more about the lower part of the organizational pyramid, I can imagine.
It is, but it's not exclusively those sorts of roles. You know, sometimes you can have a relatively junior role that is really hard to fill, you know, if it's a limited skill. So when we started looking at, you know, how do we differentiate our recs? How do we look at what's high volume and what's more of a reactive role? We thought initially, okay, it's going to be everything that's the graduate opportunities, interns, etc. And yes, there is definitely a high volume element to those. I agree. But it wasn't everything that's junior, and it wasn't completely missing out anything that was relatively senior. So something like, for example, software engineer. So your classic software engineer, the type of skills we normally have. Yeah, we're generally hiring for those all the time. An account exec in a country such as the US, which we're hiring again all the time. So high volume is not necessarily linked to just some the junior roles, and it makes it more difficult to differentiate it. You can't just do it by a level, and it's got to be more about your knowledge of how many people you want to hire of that type.
Fantastic. I think because that's a common held misperception of how the high volume recruitment might really work, because that changes everything. That changes how well you have to be equipped as the hiring manager and the recruitment team. So I think it changes the dynamics a lot.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So talking about change, maybe I think it might be helpful to move into how the job market is changing for such positions, high volume recruitment positions, both from a recruiter point of view and candidate point of view. So when you, for example, take into account economy, competitive pressures, remote work, are there any tools that you would like to share with us, Andrea?
Yeah, I mean, look, the market's always changing, isn't it? And, you know, when people talk about, is it candidate-centric, is it employer-centric? And it really sometimes just depends on the location, and it will depend on the type of role. So in tech at the moment, we've seen a ton of layoffs in lots of companies in tech. So there's almost an expectation that it should be easy to hire right now, and any recruiter in tech will say that no, it's still hard. You know, there's still not enough talent out there. So the market is always going to be shifting around, okay? And sometimes it's easier at certain times of the year, of course, but you know, August is very tough to hire if you're in Europe, because if your candidates aren't on holiday, your hiring managers probably are. So, you know, we've always got some challenges that we're going to be dealing with. But when it comes to how we're going to hire in the future, and how do we predict that sort of thing? How do we predict what the talent flow is going to be like? We've been talking about the war for talent probably since I first came into recruitment, okay? It's never going away. We're always going to be looking for new skills. We've all got those hiring managers that will want to just keep stacking extra skills onto a massive shopping list already. So we really need to change the dynamic of that. We need to be thinking about, well, how do we hire for potential? How do we hire people that are going to come in with the basics and the right attitude, but also learn on the role? And that's the only way that we're ever going to solve this talent war that we have concocted as an industry. We have to think of it differently. We have to hire for the right skills, but not always bringing someone in who's going to do the job on day one at 100%. So, you know, I had this conversation with quite a few hiring managers over the years. And, you know, if you ask a hiring manager, what was the best hire they've ever made. They never talk about someone that came in that could do the job day one, because that was just a hire, right? But they do love to talk about the ones that came in, they didn't have everything they needed, they're about 70% of the job, and then they grew them and they developed them into the amazing salesperson or engineer or whatever it is that within their team. So it's the ones that they develop, they get really excited about. And once you can get them thinking in that way, there's your skill. There's your entry point to get them thinking of people who don't come in with 100% of the experience. They're coming in with only limited amount of skills. And if they're thinking in that way, then you open up high volume recruitment. Because in the tech industry, we have to look for people who are just coming in with 70% of the skills to be able to hire at volume. We're never going to be able to hire at volume people that can come in and do the job day one. That's the problem we're always going to have. And that's caused by this talent war that we have actually just created ourselves. It's completely unnecessary.
I think that's very interesting. You pointed out a lot of interesting insights there, but two of them especially struck me. So first of all, the not basing your strategy around someone or people who can do the job on day one. I think this is potentially indicating that the whole why maybe the companies shouldn't put themselves in a position to need that somebody comes in and they become operational on day one. So maybe there's something broader, a larger piece of work in the background that avoids that in the first place. So I think hiring and potentially maintaining people, keeping them in the company and training them they're all going hand in hand. There's a big integration there. I think the other point you made earlier in your response to this question was, even if there's a lot of layoffs, there have been a lot of layoffs in the tech industry, it is still challenging to identify a strong talent or good fit. So can you tell me a little bit about that? Because for some of our audience, it might be counterintuitive, even if there are more people in. So can you tell a little more about that, please, Andrea?
Yeah. So I can't remember where I read this now. Okay, unfortunately, but when I was looking at the tech layoffs, so just looking at tech industry, where the layoffs were, and a huge number were in the back office functions. They were in HR, very much in recruitment, as everyone will know that's probably on this call. Also a lot in finance, in IT back office type roles. Also, limited numbers in go-to-market, limited numbers in software engineering as well. So we're not necessarily been laying off the people that we still need to hire.
Yeah.
And so it's not been across the board at all. It was quite shocking seeing how some functions in somewhere like Meta or Google had just been decimated, but other functions we're still growing. They're still trying to hire in certain areas, and it's the areas that we're all trying to hire in, and we're all looking for those still those same skills. So it's not even. And until we get better at trying to develop people, we're all going to be going after the same people. And we've all had those candidates that they seem to be, it just keeps going round the companies, all the competitors. And, they're not necessarily doing anything new. They're just hoping to get into the right place at the right time. So they ride a wave. When the wave starts to go, they go on to the next place. I'm not saying all candidates like that, but we've all seen them.
Yes.
Not necessarily people that are really going to grow the organization. They're just going to be there on a seat riding the wave.
Understood. Very clear. Thank you very much. I think when talking about the current trends, it is impossible to ignore the remote work reality these days. Would you like to talk a little about that? How it affects, do you think, this kind of recruitment?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've seen such a move towards it in the during the pandemic and after it. I remember seeing some research this going back some while ago. About 5 years ago, there was some research came out. There was that surveyed students or people, raw graduates actually, what were they looking for? And 90% of them were looking for work that would be hybrid or remote. 90%. However, only 10% of roles offered remote or hybrid working. And at that time, this is 5 years ago, I was thinking, this is a great opportunity. We should go and do, we should offer remote or hybrid work. That's going to get more people coming in. And then the pandemic hit and everyone did it. And we all realized, actually, yeah, we are hiring different types of people. We saw the number of people coming into the organization because we went 100% remote. We saw more women. We saw also a higher diversity of ethnic minorities coming into the organization. And that was quite interesting to see that big shift. We've continued to be offering remote and hybrid for most of our roles. And we definitely do have some people that join the organization because they really, they need to have that in their lives. I've worked hybrid or remote now for a very long time. And certainly when I had young children, it meant that I could actually just balance my work life. I could make sure that my weekends were not spent just trying to catch up from the week. It meant that when I was making a cup of coffee, I was throwing a load in the washing machine, and, really basic stuff like that helped me to balance stuff. So I know from a personal point of view, having that opportunity to be hybrid really helped me as a parent and with other dependents, going on in my life. So yeah, it's still changing now to the point you that was a slightly personal element to it, but everyone understands where this comes from. We see other companies saying they will want to return to office. We are also in that position now where we are encouraging people to return to office. How is that going to impact who we attract in the future? It's still an unknown. I think there will still be people that will decide they want to go for a hybrid role or remote in the future as well. And so companies that are able to offer that are going to be able to attract a wider pool of candidates. It's just, that's what we've got used to now. That said, don't we all miss the office a little bit sometimes? So, but
yes,
to be fair,
absolutely.
I do get to work at home. There's less coffee chats.
yes, absolutely. So I can relate to all remote working environments at VireUp. 6 people are spread in 5 different cities, and we, I think, work very effectively. So I might be a bit subjective on this one, but I'm a big fan of remote work. Having said that, you touched upon them a little. Would you like to talk a bit more about potential disadvantages of working remotely? What companies should watch out for, and how to manage them a little bit? Because this can be a whole different conversation topic, but maybe we can touch upon a few points that you can think of.
Yeah, it is an interesting topic, isn't it? So when all these offices that have been redesigned during the COVID era for people coming back, there was an expectation that people were going to come in and there was going to be a lot of meetings, I think. And everyone would be collaborating. So we've got all these open collaboration spaces. And it's interesting, the companies that have done 100% RTO, or return to office, they're not necessarily the spaces they've been using. And there's been some companies that have had to redesign their space again because it wasn't being used in the way that they expected. There still needs to be those quiet areas, the areas that people can actually just put their head down and not talk to anyone. And an open plan environment is not the best for that. And certainly, I think we experience this a lot in tech companies. People that are neurodiverse generally don't really like being in an open plan environment. They want to be shutting out the world around them. So the amount you can do sitting at home, focused on work where you just need quiet, is you can do a lot more at home than you can do in the office, unless you've got very quiet spaces that have been created for you there. But the piece that we all miss is that it is the collaboration. It's that piece of being able to bounce ideas off, or sometimes those walk-by conversations, the connections that we can make. And we really need to rethink how we design offices and how we create those spaces that people can, so they're using it more effectively. But also that we are creating better etiquette for meetings. Like, I've been doing a global role for a long time, and it was a company I used to work for where everyone was in the office in the Bay Area in the US, apart from me in the leadership team. And I used to join by WebEx, as we had then. And I'd be the one on the phone or even on the screen trying to wave and get attention. They will be talking in the room to each other, and I couldn't hear what was being said sometimes because they'd be talking over each other. I also found it very difficult to actually interject into the conversation. And I just thought, this is probably the least inclusive experience ever. And I'm very aware of that. So when we have meetings, I like to make sure that if half the people are on screens, everyone should be on a screen. You can't have some people in a meeting room, or if they do, they're going to have to follow really strict etiquette to make sure that people on the phone or on video are getting the opportunity to contribute to the meeting. Especially when important decisions are taken, I think it brings an environment of fairness and avoid the risk of going in the wrong direction, or whoever is loud wins the argument type of situation, I think. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, there's a whole other piece, isn't there, around introverts and extroverts in meetings, and how to include people and get the questions coming in. I think, by the way, I do think people can make comments on LinkedIn if they do want to ask a question during the session. I think they're able to do that. I can see a couple of people put comments up. I don't know if they're going to come up in real time, but yeah, it might be an option. I will check that out very quickly. Meanwhile, while I ask one of my colleagues to help me out on that one, I want to move on to the next question, and I will come back to the comments. So back to the high volume recruitment situation. Do you see any inherent challenges for talent acquisition teams to deal with a high number of applicants, and what are they? Yeah. Well, we've had that for a long time, haven't we? So, this is something that we tried to look at. So we had a team that looked at, well, how would we create a high volume process at VMware that was going to work, that was going to scale, so that we could hire people on a fast and frequent basis and have that always on hiring model I mentioned earlier. And some of the challenges that we were dealing with, there was, well, first of all, to get people to agree on a generic description, a profile that we could hire. So, that whole thing about hiring for potential, that was really important. So that was the first challenge. Not to say they've got to have the experience in this tiny bit here that you think it's going to take them 2 months to learn that. It should not be used as a decision not to hire someone. So there's that element. The second element was using a system that can cope with different hiring managers being able to see the same pool of candidates. So a lot of applicant tracking systems don't allow different hiring managers to look at the same pool of candidates. So that's another issue. We've got around that by using a CRM, but it's, that was our workaround because our ATS wouldn't let us do it. And CRM's got a lot of other good things that we can use as well. Another issue that we had was that by so many applicants coming in, how do we screen for these effectively? There's been a lot of talk about video interviewing, and that works in some areas. Sometimes you can do video interviews, you can have them doing standardized questions. it's, it works in some markets better than others. So there's lots of opportunity to use video at that first stage to pull down the list, or at least asking questions that can be used to knock people out. But it's very time intensive unless there's an element of AI in it. So if it's then got to have someone actually watching all the videos to then make decisions, it can get incredibly time consuming. So we need to be better using AI for that. And also just having potentially sometimes not always the same individual and TA screening. So we brought in a system where we had a more junior person in TA would do the initial check through, I guess, of screening those candidates, so that they could then, so the short list as such could be passed on, or even a longer list could be passed on to the recruiter to then take it through to the next stage. So sometimes it's about putting the right work with the right people and not always expecting a recruiter to be a jack of all trades.
I understand. So I think you touched upon one of the questions that I see on LinkedIn. Well, was the process that you follow in terms of recruiting for these? You mentioned that usually someone relatively junior starts with filtering down candidates and then passing them over. And also you mentioned challenges around how effective videos can be used, how efficient they can be used, and the ability to share data, importance of sharing data between recruiters, having a common standard for that. I think these are very useful. Is there any disadvantages of using a relatively junior or less experienced person at the beginning of the process? Because I can imagine lots of people are apply, and sometimes there's a lot of effort and cost involved to filter them down. I can see the economic reason behind that. Do you also, for example, see a challenge with putting someone with limited experience to that, maybe?
Yeah, I totally get that, because, the great thing about, we've got a really experienced recruiter, they're able to see those left field candidates, the ones that don't even fit the brief, but they somehow, and it's sometimes it's a little bit of an art rather than a science, I think, that experienced recruiters have, where they're able to say that person can come in and they can be amazing in the role. So so yeah, experienced recruiters do add something extra, we know that. But when we're looking at high volume, we really are just trying to streamline and make the process faster. When we brought in this process, we halved the time for high volume hiring. So it massively decreased our time to fill, which is exactly what we needed when we had an always on repeatable roles that we're trying to hire. But in terms of the process, I can see, one of those questions there, we did, so the process would be, they would come through, they would be screened by a junior sourcer, effectively, who would be doing that screening first element. Then they would go into a consistent set of interviews, possibly tests if it was a technical role, but there would be distinct ones that they would go through, and they would go through our process, which would be a discovery interview, a strengths-based interview, and then some kind of work sample simulation so we could see what they're actually like in the role. So there was a standardized format for that, for a very broad set of roles. So they'd go through that, and then they would come out at the end, there would be a debrief with everyone that had been involved in the interviewing of the number of candidates that had gone through that particular day. And then they would be selected for whatever roles. Now, there was that possibility that someone's been interviewed, but not interviewed by who would be their boss, by their hiring manager. So we would then add in, and it would be more like, just a meet and greet, really get on, let's get you to meet, you can talk through, but it's really about for them both to find out, yes, is this going to work on that level? I think that's more important from a candidate experience point of view, as opposed to a screening point of view. We'd already decided we wanted to hire them. It was more of a case of, they want to meet their boss, and I think that's fair before they get hired. So that worked a lot faster by bringing it all together in a much more succinct process than having a very siloed process across different teams.
It's clearly a very sophisticated process, and people's careers and companies' success are in the line. So it's a very significant output process. Are these steps tend to be go, no go type of really elimination type of designed processes, or can a person do badly in one but really very well in some other stage? Do you still look at like a overall view of the picture?
Yeah. So, before they're going into the interview day, they would have had a screen. Okay. So that's you've reached a level, I guess, that means, okay, you're should be possible. So then let's say they're really they didn't do well in one particular interview, but they did extremely well in the others. There would be a discussion. They would be like, well, why did they do badly in that? What was the other thing? Is it something that wasn't dug into properly? Did we need to review that? Was it, why? There should be a question of, if someone's done badly in one particular interview, but they've done really well in the others, let's dig into it. Let's find out why. It shouldn't just be okay, let's throw them out now. Because these are humans. I mean, this is why we are not yet being hired by robots, okay? Because you do need to sometimes look at the nuances of what has gone wrong there to understand what's not happening. And that's the skill generally of a recruiter, and guiding those interviewers and the hiring manager ultimately through the process.
Fantastic. We're slightly above our time, but if you're okay, I would like to ask one last question, then wrap up, Andrea. And meanwhile, if anyone has any questions, please try to send over LinkedIn. Apparently, the system is working, so we can see. So maybe we can have one or two other questions. So you were talking about the hiring robots, etc. So the technology. When I look at the technological approaches in screening and selection process, and of course, especially with a perspective on AI. What do you think about these developments? Are they good? Are they downsides? Or are they risks? So what do you think about them?
Well, it's going to impact all our roles, right? And, when I started in recruitment, LinkedIn didn't exist, okay? So you can imagine what that would have been like then when you're trying to find individuals in a company. It really was someone phoning up and asking, can I speak to your marketing manager type thing? Or what's the name of your marketing manager? I mean, it was incredibly time intensive. When LinkedIn came in, it just solved so many problems that we had, okay, as in exec search. So that was one massive change for us. And I do think AI it's a similar thing. It's not going to mean the robots take over, but it is going to dramatically change the roles that we have. So the biggest thing that's happened in my career was the introduction of LinkedIn, which, that sounds ridiculous, but that has actually had the biggest impact. The next bit will be AI. So I do expect that a lot of the admin part of a recruiter's role will disappear. So all the things that just take time, that are generally quite soul destroying, that lots of recruiters are really, really bad at, those things are going to disappear because those will be done by AI or whatever, augmented by it at least. So it's really going to be about the personal relationships, and it's going to be about bringing in lots of different data and lots of different information and being able to interpret the data and use it to drive the conversation and to change the way that we might be hiring. So, for example, things like, sometimes we might look at, okay, we're going to hire 50 engineers in a particular location. And we had one of these a few years ago. And because we had great data, because we were able to use, it wasn't AI, but it was, the early stages of actually having a little bit of intelligence in there. We were able to see that, in fact, the population of the engineers with the right experience that we had in the location we wanted to have an office totaled about 65. So there's no way we were going to be able to hire 50 of the 65 population. So it wasn't a great location to try and build this hub. In the old days, and when I say old days, I'm saying 5 years ago, we would have had to go through a lot of different conversations, really checking out the market, and probably would have got that same piece of data after a good 6 to 12 months. So that's a really simple example of how we can use market intelligence and augmented by AI to really change how we're having those conversations with the business about how we hire, what the talent strategy is, how we're going to change things. It does mean that there's going to be less people in TA in the future, I think. Like many back office functions, it's going to be the relationship angle, it's going to be the added element, and it's going to be the ability to interpret and use data effectively to make decisions. That's what
I can. Yes, well, I share your vision. I think 100%. I can especially relate to the your points around the jobs that nobody wants to do, sort of being handed over to machines instead of people who don't want to do that. And of course, the term you used, augmentation, about how we look at AI, I think I can relate to that completely. It is there to augment human capacity and the quality of the work that we do. I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Of course, no need to say from my point of view too. So I think I also share a positive vision of the future, how this will shape for mankind in general. So I think we don't have further questions coming from the audience. We have answered the ones that we have received. Andrea, before we close, do you have anything else to add? You have shared amazing insights for us, and I'm really at your debt. I think that was a fascinating session. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to mention?
No, but well, all I can say is that I don't think anyone has actually cracked how we do things effectively yet in TA. Everyone's got something they're doing that's amazing. The more that we can do as a profession to just share information and help each other out and give and inspire each other to do better and to make things work, I think that's where the secret's going to lie. And I love that recruitment and talent acquisition people generally really love tech and new tech, and they like experimenting and they're curious about stuff and using things like ChatGPT to make job descriptions better and all that sort of thing. So let's all just make it better and elevate and share information and not be too proprietary. That would be amazing. So that's my request to people. And also feel free to link in with me if anyone got further questions or wants to have a chat at any time.
Amazing. That was very generous of you, Andrea. Thank you very much. Pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule. And I would like to thank to all of our guests. Thank you for your time. I hope you found it as insightful as I did found it. So please, as Andrea said, do not hesitate to reach out to us with any comments, questions, connection requests. So we are here for you. So watch out VireUp page for the future events. Another announcement is coming soon. Thank you very much, Andrea. Thank you very much, our dear audience.